Well, hello and welcome to another fantastic live stream. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tuomas Syrjänen and Maija Hovila, where we're going to be talking about a recent paper that we published around precision product creation. Now, this paper I've been working on for a number of months, and it's been such an exciting field to start thinking about how we move away from thinking about product portfolios really to information portfolios. And it's been an absolute joy to work with leaders in the field like Tuomas and Maija. And today we're going to share a little bit of what we've learned, but also give you a chance to sort of meet both of them. So with that, I want to welcome both Tuomas and Maija. So Tuomas, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your current focus is, and then Maija afterwards?
Yes, my pleasure. So my background is I'm one of the founders of consultancy called Futurice. So we are digital engineering and innovation consultancy in Central Northern Europe. So originally from Finland, but nowadays also large presence in Germany, Nordics, and so on. Currently 650 people. I also had a role of a CEO for 10 years, but I actually stepped down from the role close to 3 years ago. And with one key driver was this, what we're also talking today, is that I started feeling that we have quite a lot of issues in knowledge work. For example, capturing knowledge, transparency to the market, transparency into the organization, also those kind of topics. And I felt that there must be a better way, and then started working with sort of our own data and AI renewal. So how do we rethink knowledge work, both internally with Futurice, but also with our clients? So, and this is the journey that I'm currently on.
Great. And Maija, can you tell us, you're going to share some amazing examples of the work you've been doing over the last sort of number of years, but can you tell us a little bit about your current role and what you're focusing on?
Yeah, I'm currently working at Kone, which is one of the global leaders in elevators and escalators, building the analytics capabilities, how we better utilize data in the industrial company. I was previously almost 5 years at Unilever, so building the analytics team and utilization of data and insights was there for the global company.
Brilliant. Yeah. Right, so this is going to be a super fun conversation. We're going to be sharing, again, lots of the lessons we've learned over the last number of years. Make sure you drop your questions. We'll try and answer them as we go along. If this really resonates, again, stick with us and even subscribe to the YouTube channel, so you'll be getting lots of more interesting papers as we go along. So really, why did we think about product portfolio innovation? What was the shift that we wanted to see? And really, what we want to get companies thinking about is they need to move away from product portfolios and start thinking about innovation portfolios. Much of the prevailing approach to portfolio management is outdated, and it's actually inhibiting innovation. And we're going to show you how you can recognize when your internal capabilities, your industry trends, and customer needs are actually best aligned to bring products to market. And we have about 10 to 12 amazing examples of where we're going to show you how companies are really leveraging information portfolios to create a competitive advantage to drive their future growth. What steps you need to take to start building your information portfolio and data collection capabilities. So hang in there, it's going to be super exciting, and you have lots of chances to ask questions as we go along. But like many of these ideas, so how did it start? Well, really, the best place to start any sort of debate, I think, is on Twitter these days. And one of the things we were constantly seeing is that people kept going to building things first, when they had any idea of what products they were going to build. And really, the insight for me was product development was actually not about building products. It's about building knowledge about the product you want to build. And then great products emerge as a result of that. And this was sort of an observation that was constantly seeing, that people were stuck thinking about they had to build things first and then start to understand and measure afterwards. And we sort of weren't really helped in a way by the lean startup circle. Eric would talk about build, measure, learn, but in fact, this is actually the wrong approach to take. What we should be doing is thinking about, what do we need to learn? What's the first sort of insight that can help us understand that there is even an opportunity? What's a hypothesis we have? And then you start to build something to test that hypothesis and measure the results. So even this notion of building first and building products first is actually a fallacy. You need to start thinking about how you need to learn. And one fun example for me of this was one startup I had was a wine company where if you took photos of a bottle of wine, we would send you a bottle of wine within 2 days straight to your house. So the hypothesis for us was that if people were interested in wine, if they were taking photos of wine, how would we understand if they would buy that wine? So I didn't even have to build anything. What I needed to learn was, did people care about wine? So I went on to one of the greatest research platforms in the world, Twitter, and I just started searching to see what people would take photos of and would they take photos of wine? And I found Eric Perez here, who you could see hundreds of people were taking photos of bottles of wine. So I could build something really small, a tweet. I would just send people a tweet saying, hey, Eric, looks like you enjoyed a bottle of Chateaubriand. Would you like to buy a bottle at 5% at this discount price? And send them this simple tweet. And people started clicking on all these tweets. And over a weekend, I made $5,000. And I didn't build anything. I just figured out what I needed to learn. Did people actually care about wine? What's the smallest thing I could start to do to test that hypothesis and learn and measure if people actually did it? And this generated me $5,000 over a weekend, and I bought a nice bottle of wine. So it's flipping these sort of thinking ideas. For many companies, we're trapped in a sort of outdated paradigm using outdated models, measures, and metrics. Most companies are still measuring output on time, on budget, on scope for these products that they already commit to, ideas that they just fund without very little knowledge. And it really leads to just a wasted money, missed opportunities, and losing market share over time. And this is the sort of challenge we're constantly seeing around making good investments in products. When I think back about lean enterprise and thinking about innovation portfolio management, a lot of the challenges were companies didn't even know what they were building, or they were funding one or two big bets that had to save the company. They were overinvest, and teams would have to spend the money quickly with the fear it would be taken away. Nobody knew what was going on inside their companies. I would map their portfolios with them, and no one in the room ever knew everything project that was happening or how they were progressing. Their measures of success were all about, was it on time? Was it on budget, on scope? No understanding of, was anyone using the product? So challenges all across the par. And the investments were poorly timed. They were just based on annual planning, and we're doing an innovation this year. And data was always an afterthought. So many projects would be launched into the market, and then we started to think about whether they were working or not. So this is sort of a lot of the things that really needs to be unlearned. First of all, even our definition of value needs to be redefined. Now, for many people, whether you're working in an agile team and you're looking at story points or business value, whatever the hell that means, we need to get very crisp about the outcomes that we're aiming for. Are we looking for a higher percentage of customers to use a specific feature that we launch, or increase the percentage of their reinvestment with us in our bank accounts? Thinking about outcomes from the beginning, are starting with questions. We have the capability now. Data is more accessible, granular, and real time than ever. And we can start to use analytics platforms to create tighter feedback loops between our hypothesis and testing, just like I did in minutes on Twitter. So the information portfolio really is not thinking about all this data that you have and how do you get access to it and where it is. It's actually about thinking about the questions. What are the hypotheses, the hunches, the things that we believe might be an opportunity, and asking what information do we need to start testing that? And that will help us to bring the right product at the right time with the right people, and think about building more an information portfolio than a product portfolio. And this is really the key message we want you to all think about, is this isn't about going out and finding all the data that you have and trying to synthesize it and do something with it. It's thinking about what information do you need, and then figuring out the smallest step you can start to get it and start learning. And this is really sort of the main transition we're seeing from these old classical big plan driven output based return on investment revenue lagging metrics of classic companies to even these steps we saw with Lean Enterprise, thinking about experimentation. It's still building, launching, and then testing. I think what data now offers us this huge opportunity is to start thinking, what do we need to learn to find out if we even have any opportunity here? So with that, I'll pass on to Tuomas to share some of his insights in this area too as well.
Thanks, Barry. So the way I look at this is that there's a paradigm shift ongoing. Of course, we are still very early, but we can all recognize the classic paradigm where, for example, when we faced an uncertainty, the answer was planning. Then sort of like Lean Enterprise and other sort of like approaches gave an approach how to, for example, approach the uncertainty through experimentation. And Futurice, it still currently is very much on this kind of innovation paradigm. Our way of handling uncertainty is experimentation. We are building the data capabilities, but of course there's still a lot of ways to go. And we measure things like instead of measuring like the revenue and EBIT, we are measuring innovation accounting, things like how many clients are picking up the new release or daily usage and those kind of things. But then today we're going to talk more about this kind of data and AI paradigm, where the kind of the question setting, if we come up with a question or problem, it's not about like let's experiment. The question is, where can we find data? Or can we simulate the uncertainty? Can we sort of like find especially, I think what I find interesting are this proxy data, because quite often I come across in so many cases that actually the official data is really hard to get. But then we can actually find some proxy data that actually correlates really well with the real problem. Just as an example, we found out in one case that Google Trends is really good proxy for a lot of consumer behavior. We actually found out that Google Trends actually moves in about a week to consumer spending statistics. So now that we can actually now that we know that Google Trends actually simulates quite well and proxies, we can actually use that much easier than trying to get exact consumer spending on certain topics. And so on. And overall, I think the key topic is the outcomes of these different paradigms. The classic paradigm, the biggest outcome was that we can actually coordinate large number of people. Innovation paradigm harnesses people's brain power. And then the data and AI reconnects the company, and we will talk a bit about that later. There's plenty of studies why we need to look at the knowledge work and how we do it. I think one of the most resonating studies I came across was that there was a study about a R&D, how much is wasted on R&D, and then result was 50%. There was a lot of duplication, there's a lot of just waste because of bad timing and so on. And actually, when I talk this statistic with some of the R&D executives, they are saying that this is underestimating, that they claim that they are actually wasting more than 50%. How to get going? Yes, I think we need to unlearn also. I think it's getting easier and easier how to do this. The tool sets are improving, the access to data, the ecosystems around data are improving. So I think that the key here is to also the relearn and how you approach problems. But let's look at some examples. One of my favorite examples of this kind of building the information portfolio to create actual products is from Coca-Cola. So we probably all know the Coca-Cola Freestyle, which is a kind of like mixing machine where people can mix. Of course, it creates value by itself. People can create drinks that they like. But I think that the genius part of that is that actually at the same time, it gives Coca-Cola insight of what people like. And now they don't need to guess what people like. They can actually create products based on this data. And I think this is also something that I feel should be considered. Can we create double purpose products? Products that actually have a primary way of creating value to clients, sort of that the usage like Coca-Cola Freestyle, and the secondary use where we actually can generate better products. And then, of course, another example of building information portfolio in a slightly different way is Amazon. So Amazon is using third-party vendors as a test bed. So, of course, they get all the data, so they can actually look at which products are selling, and they can release their own products based on that data much better than anyone else. We can, of course, debate whether that is the right way to do it, but that is one way to create product based on data without need for that much of experimentation. Maybe not that much of a sort of product creation, but I think I want to talk a little bit about Global Fishing Watch, because I think the kind of how they use data is ingenious. So we would think that how hard it is to tackle illegal fishing. It's very wicked problem. But what Global Fishing Watch has done is they created an information portfolio to know exactly where illegal fishing happens and ability to act upon. So they're collecting the GPS coordinates from the IAS system, and then they are teaching AI to sort of recognize which are fishing vessels. Of course, not all sort of fishing vessels are illegal ones, especially are using the GPS. So they're also using nighttime satellite images and the lights, because fishing vessels use a lot of lights. So this way they can actually recognize fishing vessels globally. Then they just overlay that information on top of a map, which shows also marine sanctuaries. And based on this exact precision information, they can help local authorities to fight illegal fishing. And what happened, if you look at their site and the videos, you can see that in a couple of months they were able to clean most of the illegal fishing from the marine sanctuaries. And I think this is the kind of the precision that we want, from information to insight to precision action. One example about what kind of insight there is, of course, we know patents. That's a lot of information. We all know that there's a lot of patent landscaping tools as well. QuantIP has also one. But also QuantIP has one interesting topic, which is assessing the quality of the IP. So knowing, is our IP good, or are the competition IP good? So what is the quality of the IP? And that also, again, generates new sorts of insight of who are potentially our competition in the future. What should we focus on? And then looking at the next slide, this is actually one of the interesting topics about information portfolios. It also changes the strategic point of view quite drastically. So Orange Bank, one of the most successful banks in France and elsewhere, they are using their telecom data to enter a different market. And they are claiming public that they can actually reduce improve the sort of accuracy of their loans and get rid of the challenges with the telecom data. So what is the question now? From strategic point of view, do we have actually data in our organization that could actually give us access to a new market, unfair advantage? Or to put it the other way, if we put the threat hat on, does someone else have data that actually gives unfair advantage in attacking our own business? And I think that also changes how you look at world. It's not just a traditional who's working in what industry. Good. We can move on.
Yeah, if you still go to the previous slide, continue, because this links very well to what Tuomas was saying and also Barry. So when I was working at Unilever in the insights team, our tagline actually was, what's your question? We have the answer. Because in order to create business value, you have to start from the right questions and then look for the answers for those questions. So the hardest part is actually having the intelligent questions and the right questions. I think the easy part nowadays is to find the answers, because there's so many different data sources available that you can find kind of intelligent, having the proxies, and that's the easier part. And actually, it's also very crucial that in the company, whatever information we create, it is visible to as many people as possible, so that we then increasingly ask smarter questions, because you have a little bit of the information, and then that sparks even smarter questions, and that's kind of like a virtuous circle that you get increasingly better questions, and then of course the answers to follow that. But I'll talk through a couple of the examples from my current and also previous job. So first one is the Lipton matcha case, and this is a case where instead of asking selected people what they think, observation and proactive behavior was used as a proxy. So the Lipton team was a couple of years ago was facing a problem that the black tea market was really in decline, and they needed to find a new variant that would really give them a growth. And in order to understand what the consumers are really discussing in relation to tea, the social media and social discussions were used as a data source. So there was a lot of modeling, topic modeling, NLP, sentiment analysis used in order to find the kind of trends that the people are interested in. They are positive, and they are also not just facts, but actually trends. And that's where the matcha tea was then launched as a result. And the result was that it became the leading iced tea variant within 5 months and added 11 million pounds of incremental value for the company in a year. So a great success. The other case is the Magnum vegan case. So in case of Unilever, millions of people call the customer contact center every single year. And it's actually a revolutionary source of insight for the company. And probably for many companies that they just might not even realize what goldmine they have at their hands. Many people get in touch to complain, but actually even more people give to ask questions or give suggestions that really tell about their needs. That is a great source of insight. So this is where the Magnum vegan case kind of got started, because there was a realization that increasingly people are asking whether Magnum is vegan friendly. And of course, then more data sources was used, including the Google Trends that Tuomas was mentioning, which is actually a really great source of data for certain topics. And then as a result of all of these insights, the Magnum vegan product line was launched. Okay, and then next one. Then this is a case about utilizing large data sets for trends, which some of them might actually be kind of surprising sources. So at Kone, similar to probably many companies, we have been asking the question of whether and when the life is starting to get back to normal after this epidemic. And Kone being one of the leaders in the elevator and escalators, we get data from the elevators where we can see how many times the elevators are actually starting, which is then proxy to people getting back to life. As one of the probably biggest symptoms for the epidemic was that people are not moving anymore. So they're staying at home, but they are not moving around. So then looking at the elevator start data, we can actually see the first wave, then kind of things started to get a little bit better towards the end of last year, and then kind of going down again. So unfortunately, it looks like we are not quite out of this yet, but we, of course, continue to monitor the data and see kind of where we will be back. But of course, then this data is then sparking more questions about, like, what about kind of different questions, but really great and maybe a little bit surprising source of data we can use. And then third case study is, it's about utilizing assumptions versus looking at the probabilities and reality and data. So this case is for Ben & Jerry's. And the assumption for Ben & Jerry's had always been that it is an impulse buy, that people buy it as an impulse. When they go to the shop and it's sunny, they buy it. But then when we were looking at the data, it was actually surprising that when we were all laying the weather data and then the conversations and the volume of the conversation and the sentiment, and people were, when it looked like the weekend is going to be rainy, people were talking on Thursdays and planning that they're going to buy a pint of Ben & Jerry's and watch a movie because it's going to be raining in the weekend. And of course, this is a great revelation for the communications and marketing team. Instead of advertising the products in the supermarket, for example, when it's kind of waste of money and waste of effort, because if people have already made the decision on Thursday to buy it on a Saturday, it's just that you have just executed in the supermarket, then of course you have to shift the way that you communicate about the products and kind of get the people to make the right decisions at the right time when you are giving them the information that they need. So this was sort of also a big thing for the company, maybe a surprising revelation that then led to the kind of business think about the communication and marketing in a different way.
Jana, can you share the story as well about how you came up with mixing cereal and ice cream as well?
Oh yes, yeah, that's another one. So I don't know where the initial idea was that actually people are. So we were tracking a lot of discussions around kind of the brand names and kind of different topics, and then there was a notion that people are actually talking about a lot of, like, ice cream and breakfast are mentioned together in a lot of the conversations. And then kind of digging more into the topic of, like, you know, what are they talking about? We then came up with the ideas like, actually people do have ice cream for breakfast, but then maybe traditionally cereal is thought as a breakfast food. So then how about combining these two and then making a cereal ice cream so that you can enjoy the ice cream that you want to have for breakfast, but maybe having it a bit more traditional, also including cereal in it.
Yeah, which I love that example. It's like there's 50 songs that have ice cream and cereal in the title, and identifying that as a proxy to launch a cereal and ice cream flavor and it be so successful is another just so interesting to me. So one other little example, again, I wanted to share was even in the food and coffee space. So I was involved in building connected coffee machines called Cubo. And one of the most interesting things actually about building the machine was not necessarily the hardware manufacturing, but really when you start thinking about these devices as sensors in people's homes and the behavior that they have about when they drink coffee, what types of flavors that they would like. And very much like the Coca-Cola Freestyle option, we would start to send people like little packs of different sort of blends to see which ones did they like, which would they mix together. And instantly you start to get this feedback from the behavior of what people are using, what ones they like. So in certain regions, people would like the green capsules. And you can start to feed that into your supply chains about what capsules are available in stores in the area, and giving that information to business partners about what they should move, what they should stock, and understanding different blends about palettes in different areas about what people would like. So really starting to think about how the device actually was just the sensing mechanism. And really then you can start to optimize for people's palates and tastes and blends, and connecting up and improving your supply chains, all from understanding what people like to drink and when. So there's some really like fun and interesting ways to sort of start there. And you can see we went from Post-its to this was our first iteration of the coffee machine that was just like a little sensor in a dial. It's pretty fun. But if anybody wants to get a connected coffee machine, go to Cubo and check it out.
All right, then a little bit about sort of like different kind of information portfolio. And of course, Futurice is a consultancy. So our product is the knowledge, the people that we have. But we also realized, like maybe after 300 people, 400 people, that we don't know anymore what's going on, what we know, who knows about what. So we started expanding different sort of sites, Berlin, Munich, Stockholm, Helsinki, and so on. And we kept on saying to our clients that, hey, you get the knowledge of 400 people into use. And that wasn't, to be honest, that wasn't very much true, because how on earth would we know who knows about what? And of course, we had the traditional kind of knowledge management systems that people are supposed to put in their knowledge. But to be honest, only half put, and even those put very sort of like on a high level. So we started working a different approach. What about if we index the company? Instead of asking people to put like categories or manually, let's start indexing. So you see the kind of the animated GIF here is about a tool that helps to know who knows about what. So we take different kind of company level public. So I must sort of like underline, we are not going into private like emails or anything, but the one that are public, like our markings, Slack messages, public calendar markings, public project allocations. And we index who knows about what. And then we can ask whatever. Who knows about certain client? Who knows about certain very specific technology? Like I got a question via SMS from one of our clients asking for a technology that I had never heard of, and I just typed into the tool, and I got like 3 people from Tampere. The other topic is that we're also indexing the different kind of documents. It seems a bit silly, but that is the way it goes. Knowledge is spread all around the different systems, and nobody has really clue what we actually know. And actually today I was surprised, we got a new data source in, and we realized that we have roughly 700 pieces of knowledge in certain format, and we had no clue that it was 700. We probably had guessed like 50 or 100. So we are indexing, and we are making it searchable. But there's actually a interesting side effect. If you still like Barry take the previous one, we actually we can actually use that information for landscaping. So the little bit of techie picture of those dots, small dots, that's a landscape of our knowledge. So now we can landscape what knowledge we have. We can also show people that which part of the knowledge they have access to. And then we are actually working now to understand the market so that we can actually see what's happening in the market. As an example, we have had data scientists since 2010. That wasn't very good business for 5 or 6 years. We were way, way too early of the market. Of course, nowadays it's a good business. In some other cases, we are really missing the market. We are really late. But now actually what we are working is to understand what happens in the market, what happens internally, and seeing that whether we are in sync and have a proper conversation that is our kind of offering knowledge portfolio relevant in the market, or which areas we should work on. Now if you could take the next one. There are a couple of other examples. Like one topic that I find really fun, actually, is how people use medication. You know, you go to the doctor, you get a prescription, you're supposed to use it like doctors prescribe. The problem is people don't. And the problem is doctors don't know how people misuse them or what doses they use. So we actually used an alternative way of doing it. We took the biggest conversation or this kind of discussion forum, and we took all the conversations and we started analyzing how people talk about medication. And then we actually went to the doctors and showed that this is how people actually are using medication. And doctors were really mind blown because the reality was so different what they thought. People are actually using wrong medication to wrong sort of like symptoms. They are taking like completely wrong kind of doses and so on. So now we can actually connect doctors to understand how people really use the medication. Also, one example of the kind of like alternative data sources externally is the kind of city of Helsinki that kind of during the corona times, there was a problem of what happens really in the city economy. Because the traditional data sources like official statistics are 3 months to 3 years old. So corona completely sort of destroyed that information source. So what we did is that we went through 30 alternative data sources, including Google Trends, including like hotel bookings, all sorts of gig economy providers. We bought some data from what kind of jobs are applied or what kind of jobs are available. We got some all sorts of data points, 30 different. We tested 20, and in the final version, we roughly used 15 data points to create a real-time visibility and predictions. What is happening in the economy, and where should, for example, City of Helsinki put their efforts? For example, IT consultancies, IT world, we immediately saw that there is no need to intervene. But then there are lots of other areas where it was really critical to start doing things. So that's one. And then we see that we can kind of combine this kind of call centers, customer service, R&D to create the portfolio, use customer service insight to help R&D, use call centers like Maija was also explaining to help R&D and so on. So all in all, the kind of the big topic that I see here is that we need to start building information portfolios that enable the success of whether it's product creation, whether it's strategy, whether it's sales and so on. And the way we put it is this kind of connected company. The challenge is that when companies and organizations grow, we need to manage complexity. And currently the best way and the only way to manage complexity is divide the company into smaller departments, whether it's functional or business line. But anyway, what happens, we create disconnections between the market, between the units, between the departments, and that creates a lot of challenges. We can't channel information from customer service to R&D. We can't channel information from the market and so on. So what we are doing here is actually building information portfolios to enable the success of product creation and all those different things. And that is the kind of that we can use the same information portfolio to help sales, delivery operations, but very much of this kind of like management processes or R&D and investment processes.
All right, so lots and lots of sort of examples and case studies there, hopefully get everybody's creative juices flowing. So I'm just going to kick off with a couple of questions to sort of help people. And again, please keep adding your questions in the chat here. So Maija, I'm going to ask you this question first, one of the ones that comes in. It sounds like we're talking about huge amounts of data sets, highly skilled data scientists that are very hard to get. Can I get started with this if I don't have these huge access to these skills, competencies, expertise? What's your advice for folks who don't have access to these amazing talented people or capabilities?
I think it's actually like, yes, it helps if you have the data scientist because then you better do it properly. But then Google Trends is available to anybody. If you can read a graph, you can see what's happening. I don't think like a lot of the tools actually need like proper data science tools, but it probably requires more about creative thinking, innovative thinking, and you think like just go on Google data sources and Google the questions, and you probably find a lot of information. Yes, when you then make the models, you probably need statistics knowledge and to make sure that you are getting the right insights, but you can definitely get started if you have a creative mind and you innovative mind. There's a lot of stuff available that doesn't need technical knowledge.
Great. Tuomas, what are your thoughts on that question? Or what have you seen with your teams?
I completely agree. I think that I feel the bottleneck is in this kind of mindset to kind of unlearn the traditional ways. And I think this kind of also, but Barry, what you are saying, that unlearning, I think the question is that how do we change the behavior so that we start asking the questions that how might we do things? And could we get access to something? For example, we've been working with strategy. So the question is that can we get a different view to the strategy world? And internally, because nobody knows how the strategy is progressing. And we found out that we can actually use internal discussions in that as well.
Okay, great. Well, so here's another question then coming in from Paul Byrne, which is, this really sounds like creating a large company knowledge base. This has been around for years. What's different? So I guess my first question is, how effective is that large company knowledge base of yours? Paul, does anybody use it? You know, I think a few of us are smiling because we've all been on those huge monolithic single source of data projects and know that they don't work. They're disasters. So maybe Maija, do you want to kick off a little bit again on this one, having worked in Unilever, which I can only imagine like the terabytes of data in one single place and how useful that could be and what disasters happened there. And do you want to share some of the challenges and maybe what is different about this as well?
Yes, I think this links to Tuomas's comment about the mindset. So this is not an IT thing or like technology thing, somebody needs to build this database that I can then access. It's more about the mindset. Yes, it does take a lot of effort. For example, at Unilever, it was mandatory that all of the inside studies had to be put into a certain platform so it's accessible to everybody. And it took a bit of like change management to get people into that habit. But then it was definitely not driven by the technology. You have to make it easy, and you have to kind of start from the mindset of like what access and asking for the question, asking for the access. Yes, the technology supports, but I think maybe where it's been going wrong is like starting from the technology and making sure that we have to have everything in order and everything has to be mapped and like kind of technology in order. It takes years for you to get anywhere, and like people lose trust, and then it's kind of not going anywhere. So maybe kind of starting and then learning and making sure that we are kind of fast to also implement and react to the needs of the people.
Yeah, so definitely sort of one example I want to share here, Paul, is this emergence as well. We get a lot of questions. So how does this affect product teams, or what's different about trying to create these smaller autonomous units or people that are in charge of managing not only the product they're creating, but the data. And this is actually the field of data mesh, which is becoming really popular. So a classic sort of example is, maybe 10, 15 years ago, Amazon was struggling to scale their business because they had a monolithic database. It was slowing down their site. And one of the sort of famous emails Jeff Bezos sent out was that they weren't allowed to have these just big monolithic teams. They had to break into smaller autonomous units. And this was sort of the notion of two pizza teams. And what happened is that teams then started, and this is the transition from the classic to this sort of innovation paradigm, where you had smaller autonomous teams that were given problems. To Janne's point, give me a question to answer and I'll go find the answer. And this sort of started to create this small product teams. But what happened is that the team stayed small. The software that they built was modularized, but the database stayed as a monolith. And so people trying to access that information was really hard and took months, took weeks, very difficult to get access to this knowledge source. So what you're seeing now is that while we modularized the software, we didn't modularize the database. And while we gave product teams customer problems to solve, they didn't have responsibility for internal customers in the company to make their data available to them. So really with this notion of moving to a data mesh in conjunction with cross-functional product teams and modularizing your system, is that teams need to think not only about the problem they're solving, engaging with their customer, the outcomes they're trying to drive, but making their data that they're creating available internally. And a simple example might be, say you're working in Spotify and you've been given the problem to sort of discover emerging artists. And so your team is trying to find out, well, how can we elevate emerging artists in the playlist or make people aware of them? That's your customer problem. But you're also going to be responsible for the data that you gather around that problem and exposing that in meaningful ways for other teams in the company who will start to think about, well, if I need to understand something about emerging artists, how could I ask questions of that team and have their insights that they're learning in a modular way sent back to me? So people are owning not only the customer problem, but the data, and then sharing the data to their internal customers. And I think this is a huge shift about not only understanding your customer problems, but the data that goes with it and exposing it internally. So this is sort of the way we're starting to move, and very interesting. So Jussi has a question here again. How do you see information portfolio related to structured data versus unstructured data? Okay, this is another great one. Tuomas, do you want to kick off this time and hear your thoughts on this?
I think that mostly actually sort of like what we've been working with, actually it's mostly actually unstructured data. So that because like getting access to really clean structured data, it's sometimes a bit challenging, but I think it's both. And I think that I think that also like one needs to understand that we are not saying that there needs to be a perfect information. We never get perfect information. I think that the question is also like, do we 100% say that it's only data that makes a decision? No, there needs to be a human judgment. So we are helping people to make better decisions. And I think that's why I think it's both. And I think that is also kind of compared that currently to the previous question as well. I think what is happening now, so we are not talking about like brand new. Maija was doing this already many years ago. But I think the emphasis on building the information portfolios, but also the access and the ecosystems around how to get data, how the tool sets and the mindset. And I think that's what I think I would like to sort of like get going much faster. And I think this unstructured data is a one part of this kind of data ecosystem, so that there's more and more all sorts of unstructured data available. And to be honest, at least the company data that I've seen, it's quite often more unstructured than structured.
Yeah, great. Maija, do you have any thoughts on this one, what you saw in your time?
Yeah, I agree. And maybe there's a difference between like, if you use it for decision making, then maybe it doesn't need to be 100% correct, and you could probably utilize the sources in parallel. If you are doing, I don't know, predicting whether an elevator is failing, you probably need to have it in a certain structure in order to be able to run the algorithm. So maybe like two different things depending on what you're trying to do with the information.
Great. Right, there's another question here, Maija. I'd love you to kick off the answer to this one. What is the organizational design required to bring this to life? Is it managed services? Are they standalone teams? Or does it have to be products? Are they independent groups? So what are some of your thoughts and the lessons? What have you seen worked and didn't work in your sort of experiments of bringing this to life in the companies you're in?
Yeah, I think it depends on the company structure, what fits the company, because almost it should be something that is not kind of brought as an external thing, but what fits what the company is already doing. Especially in the beginning, normally it helps to have some kind of like central hub that can kick it off in order to make sure that we are utilizing the same sources. We have one version of the truth, and we can kind of create the competencies and take them further. Then probably when the company is more advanced and more mature, it can then be kind of split across the company. But I think definitely at the early stage of the maturity, there should be a central team that is kind of responsible and helping people get started and ensuring that we are doing the right things.
Great. Yeah, Tuomas, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think maybe I sort of like comment on the little bit other dimension. I think what I've found out is really important that initially to get going, I think the work needs to support the existing value levers. Like with Futurice, our value levers are knowledge and culture. So we spent improving those. But what I also see is that typically also what happens is that during maybe 1 or 2 years, 3 years, we found a new value lever that we can actually go after with this kind of data and sort of like building even a systemic change how the company operates or creates value. And I think that's also something that I would like to highlight, that initially let's elevate the existing value levers, and then let's keep our eyes open. Can we do something completely differently because we harness data into the we harness the information portfolio? And I've seen happen that already a couple of times.
All right, so another great question here. With all of these small autonomous teams and exposing data to the org at each team, it sounds like a recipe for uncoordinated nightmares. How does this link effectively back to the company strategy? So another great question, and I think actually this is a nice slide to even talk to that too. Who would like to tackle this one? Who wants to kick this one off? I think we all have pretty strong opinions on this.
If I may comment, because I think that one of the key reasons why we started the journey is that we lost the transparency. What happens at the company? So we actually ended up so our success, I think, if I put it simply, has been the ability to balance between order and chaos. This kind of area where the sort of energy is high, innovations happen for the past 10, 15 years. But the challenge is that when we kept on growing, we lost transparency. What is happening in the company? What are the kind of actually portfolio and so on? So I feel that actually this kind of data-driven sort of transparency is needed to make sure that we actually can stay this kind of highly aligned, loosely coupled company going further. So and that then goes back to what Maija said about and Barry about the transparency of the data. I think this is one of the hardest things about culturally, so that we actually decide to share the data, so that actually we can coordinate, we can even create positive control through the data and the transparency, and not end up in this chaos.
Yeah, Maija, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and I think maybe sometimes it's like you're not even aware of all of the different versions that are going through in the company, and maybe it's more about closing your eyes from the chaos than the kind of realizing that there is a chaos because you have the information. So maybe it's kind of awareness of it. The problem is probably does exist even if you're not aware of it. So we're having different versions and maybe not coordinating with each other, and then exposing it through the data is maybe a way to then get better, because when you know it, then you can improve it.
I love that you're saying that. So I have to jump to this slide as well when you say this here, because I think this notion of coordination and alignment and things in structure, everything perfectly is a hark back to this classical way of managing, that we think that we can just break everything down into components and everything will be fine and coordinated. And it's just not the case. I think this blend, of what you say, coordination, a little bit of chaos, and then make the information available to people, right? Let teams own very specific problems, and then think about, if somebody else wanted to ask questions of my team, what's the information that would be valuable to them? So that example I was trying to talk about in a Spotify music list streaming group, and you're responsible for solving emerging artist problems. What questions are people going to want to know about emerging artists? How many are there? Where are they listing? Where are they available? You got to start thinking about making the information transparent. And I think it's one of the problems, even when we even use the word information as an asset. People's language thinks asset, I have to, keep it to myself. Don't let it make it available to people. Get as much of it as I can. And I think that's sort of, again, one of these areas where we need to sort of shift. So there's lots of little questions now about just some steps about how to get started. So we want to share maybe a couple of these sort of points, really just to help teams sort of explore this space. And, what I often say is that it is very easy to get started, as both Maija and Tuomas shared. You can start playing around with Google Trends and understanding what data is about. I think it's sort of like table stakes now that you have to start educating yourself around data. Not everyone's going to be Maija and become this amazing data scientist, right? But we have to start understanding some of the steps. So, and maybe Maija, could you share a little bit some of your tips to help people get started? And then Tuomas as well, what are some of the things you think are really, really important for people to understand?
Yeah, maybe don't overthink it. Just get started and kind of start looking at things and be curious. And it doesn't need to be perfect. You can kind of take a step and then you learn more and then you ask further questions and get more intelligence.
Yeah, great. And Tuomas?
I would say that the kind of the topic is that start going and maybe use initially static data dumps. because I think that what often is a challenge is to get live data streams flowing, and that is quite often a bit costly as well. Sort of like to identify that, for example, we started with static data dumps. We worked for quite many months with static data dumps, and then we decided, okay, now we need to build a data infrastructure so that actually it flows the data and also enables other people to sort of on everyday use the same data. So, but I think that to explore the problem, just get going, explore the data, use static data dumps, use Excel, maybe a little bit of actual kind of Python code or something like that. But I think it's the mindset shift.
Great.
Get going.
Okay. Get going. Yeah, that's it. So with that, we've one or two more questions that we're going to answer. But before we get to those sort of burning questions, we've a small little ask for all of you out there. And this is an experiment for us. We're looking to learn. And so what we would love is if you just take out your phone, all you have to do is like hold it up to the monitor and see if you can scan that dinosaur. And if you can find a dinosaur on this page and scan it, it's going to pop up a tiny little link to give us some feedback and share your experiences from listening to this talk. What resonated? What was good? What could have been better? What more could we answer for you? So one of the last questions we're going to take again is, data or information exploration takes time. How do you encourage use of data or information portfolio as an everyday tool? So how can people put this into practice just every day? What are some of those small little steps to get started?
I think, if I may comment, I think that if I take an example from this morning, sort of like we have a little of this kind of citizen data science movement ongoing within our company. And this morning I was one commercial person. I shared a Google Colab with that person. I showed like how I did certain analysis, and he's sort of like practically with no coding skills, he started changing the parameters and changing the kind of the exploration topics there, and he started creating his own insight to a client based on that. So, and I think this is the kind of that actually like, and actually, to be honest, those same tools have been available, but it's just not come to anyone's mind that, hey, maybe we can do it also that way. And yes, it takes time, and I think that's why also the kind of there's also a challenge when we talk let's hire a data scientist, because I think the key topic is to iterate also the question, and that's why the domain person needs to be really close there. So I would recommend, don't give an assignment to a data scientist and check back in 4 weeks. I guarantee it's not probably going to good end result. So I think it needs to be kind of like maybe on a every day couple of times, or even faster cycles in this kind of exploration phase.
No, it's really good, and I, again, to my funny little examples, so many of the platforms out there, we've mentioned Google Trends, I think Twitter is another fantastic information portfolio. Even when we were thinking about writing this article, I just went on to Twitter and started searching for information portfolio, and Thomas and I found interesting conversations between Alexander Osterwalder, who wrote Business Model Canvas, and various different professors, where nobody was talking about this topic. And that gave us this opportunity to say, right, well, let's go fill that space. And so I think there's a lot of tools out there to get started. So there's one question, and Jana, I'd love to get you to answer this one in closing. You mentioned this idea of give us the question and we'll find you the answer. What are your tips for people formulating good questions as they start to explore this space?
That's a good question. Yeah, we actually did think that when we quoted that it's quite a bold statement, because we have no idea what they're going to ask. We're actually going to have the answers. So it was a bit of a learning as well. What is a good question? It's quite difficult. It depends on the context, but you like really thinking about it as like, what is it that you really want to know? If you had like a magic wand and there's anything you could find out about the topic, kind of try to think about what is the question, not starting from like maybe limiting yourself into like, well, I don't think this question can be answered, so I'm not going to ask it, but really kind of using kind of innovative thinking and trying to think about what really is the like the thing that you want to find out.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. You know, like I often say to sort of leaders, if you could have one little bit of it, one insight, one piece of information to help you make the most important business decision you're trying to make at the moment, what would that be? And I think when you use that idea, like you say, this magic wand, you'll be amazed with the insight or the question that people ask. And I think then it's a great way to sort of drive, you know, where would we go to find that information? Whether you're trying to start a wine company like me, or you're building cereal and ice cream products, or you're creating understanding company capabilities and the skills that you have in your business, I think you know, it's always great to sort of start and ask these fun questions. So with that, folks, that pretty much concludes our time together. It's been absolutely fabulous to have both Jana and Tuomas join me. Again, if you have enjoyed this, please do give us feedback. We crave it, we live it, we're always trying to find it. Some resources, if you want to check out the paper we publish, you can go to the website. Maija recommends a great HBR article about building this insight engine. And you know, if you want to have a book, do please look at Lean Enterprise. It's been an absolute pleasure to join you all today. Thank you very much, Maija and Tuomas, for joining me. It's been fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.